As we all know, living things need to exchange gases with the environment to stay alive. Well, the real question is how to do it. Turns out different organisms have their own different set of ways. For example, simple flatworms can do it with their skin, simple diffusion. On the other hand, insects have a set of network of complex tubes known as tracheae. Our beloved fishes, as we all know, can snatch oxygen from the water using their gills. But what about us, humans? Well, turns out we, being one of the most complex creatures on the planet, have a slightly complex system for doing the same. But before getting into what this system works and how it works, we need to understand how it actually looks. So, let's get into it. Our lungs are situated in an airtight thoracic cavity formed by the sternum anteriorly, the ribs laterally, and the thoracic vertebrae posteriorly. Also, we have the diaphragm inferiorly, forming the inferior wall of this thoracic cavity. Our journey into the respiratory system begins right at the nostrils. These open into the nasal cavity, which then gives way into the pharynx. The pharynx is divided into three parts: the nasopharynx, the oropharynx, and the laryngopharynx. The laryngopharynx, as the name suggests, opens into the larynx. The larynx, as it houses the vocal cords, is also called the voice box. The larynx then gives way into the trachea, which divides at the level of T5 into the primary bronchi. The primary bronchi then enter the right and the left lung at depressions known as hilum. As obvious as it gets, we have two lungs. Well, turns out both of them aren't exactly the same. The right one is slightly bigger than the left one for obvious reasons, as the left one has to provide some extra room for the heart to sit in the thoracic cavity. The left lung has an oblique fissure which divides it into the superior and the inferior lobe. The right lung also has the oblique fissure but also an horizontal fissure which together divide it into the superior, middle, and the inferior lobe. Both the lungs are covered by double-layered connective tissue known as pleura. The pleura has an outer parietal layer which is stuck to the thoracic wall and an inner visceral layer stuck to the lungs. In between we have the pleural fluid. This reduces friction and also helps to keep the two layers of the pleura together, just like two slabs of glass stuck with water in middle. Because of this, whatever change happens to the thoracic cavity is reflected onto the lungs. The system of tubes beginning with the trachea is known as the bronchial tree. The trachea divides into the two primary bronchi, which then divide into the secondary bronchi, which gives rise to the tertiary bronchi. These tubes are covered with incomplete cartilaginous rings, and the trachea has the incompletion in the rings on the posterior surface. As we move from the trachea towards the tertiary bronchioles and then to the terminal bronchioles, the number of these rings goes on decreasing, with terminal bronchioles having almost none. The terminal bronchioles give rise to the sac-like or bag-like structures known as alveoli, where the main gaseous exchange occurs.